Some of the topics are unnecessarily scary in the world of data science. One of such topic is p-value and hypothesis testing. Welcome to Unfold Data Science. My name is Aman and I am a data scientist. If you watch this video till end, I am going to make these two things extremely simple for you. Let's start the discussion. So what is p-value by definition? So I have written here the definition. P-value by definition is something of something being true. Let me fill these two blanks here. P-value is probability. Okay, probability. P-value is probability of null hypothesis being true. Okay, now I am sure all of you must be aware of probability concept by now. If not, there is a video created by me, the link is right here. Go ahead and watch that video to understand the basics of probability. Okay, that is about probability. Coming to null hypothesis. What is null hypothesis? So null hypothesis again we will define here. Okay, so definition of null hypothesis. I am writing here an assumption. Null hypothesis is an assumption that treats everything equal and similar. This is very important, guys. An assumption that treats everything equal and similar. Okay, what will be the examples of null hypothesis? Can you think in your mind right now? For example, we are going through a lockdown due to this current pandemic situation. Okay, so a null hypothesis may assume that situation before pandemic and situation after pandemic are same. In other words, a null hypothesis will be something like GDP before pandemic. I am writing a statement here. GDP before pandemic, okay, and GDP after pandemic. I am talking about global GDP here. GDP before pandemic and GDP after pandemic are same. So this is a statement which treats the before pandemic situation similar to after pandemic situation. That is a default assumption. Now logically, do you think this is a correct statement to make? GDP before pandemic and GDP after pandemic, will it be same? So you must be aware that many research are going on and telling that GDP might fall by 5%, global GDP. Country wise also it will be in similar range as well. So this is a null hypothesis. Now what is the use of p-value is using the data. Using the data, you prove this hypothesis to be wrong, and then you accept the alternate hypothesis. So what will be the alternate hypothesis? GDP before pandemic is not equal to GDP after pandemic. So till now we have discussed p-value is the probability value of null hypothesis being true. And what is a null hypothesis? An assumption that considers everything to be similar and equal, all the situations to be similar and equal. Another example can be front benchers are equally intelligent as the back benchers. This is another assumption, means all the students in the class are equally intelligent. Front benchers are equally intelligent as the back benchers. How can you prove this statement as wrong? You compare their marks and then you say, you know what, front benchers are scoring more, hence they are more intelligent, back benchers are less intelligent. So with the data and p-value, you either accept a null hypothesis or reject a null hypothesis. This is by definition. Now let us see what process do we follow when we go and do the hypothesis testing. This process that we discussed now is known as hypothesis testing. Okay, so what is hypothesis testing? The process of accepting or rejecting null hypothesis. How do you do hypothesis testing practically? So in our GDP example, if you have to prove whether null hypothesis is right or wrong, what you will do? You will go and collect the data, right? So very first step will be collect data. Okay, what data you will need to prove that GDP before pandemic is different from GDP after pandemic? You will take the GDP of different countries in the world, right? And then that becomes your data. Next is your significance level that you have to define. Define significance or significance level. Now what is this significance level? So I'm sure if you are into data science for some time or you have been watching some tutorials, you know there is a standard definition of 0.05 for p-value, the significance level. The meaning of this 0.05 is, if I take data of 100 countries at random, then 5% or 5 countries, the GDPs will be same, which means for 5% of the cases, the null hypothesis will hold true. That is the significance level that we fix with p-value. Okay, to give you with another, to make you understand with another example, you can say like this: if you take 100 countries GDP before pandemic, GDP after pandemic, then null hypothesis will be true for how many cases? 5 cases. So that is by definition how null hypothesis can be used and how significance level can be used. What next? If you have a significance level, if you have the data, then you can either accept or reject null hypothesis. Either accept or reject null hypothesis. The meaning of accepting null hypothesis is you accept what has been said as null hypothesis. The meaning of rejecting is you accept the alternate hypothesis. So what will be the alternate and null hypothesis? By definition, they are written as H0 and HA. So H0 stands for null hypothesis and HA stands for alternate hypothesis. In our case, H0 will be GDP is same before pandemic and after pandemic. HA will be GDP is not same before pandemic and after pandemic. That is how at high level p-value and hypothesis testing works. Now there is one step in between. Once you have defined the significance level, then you have to do certain tests to get this p-value. So what are those tests? Okay, so you need to do certain tests to get this p-value. Now there are some statistical tests you would have heard of. I'm just going to write down here some of the tests. So if you have heard of something known as t-test, if you have heard of something known as chi-square test, right? If you have heard of something known as ANOVA, if you have heard of something known as z-test, all these are different tests that is done on the data to obtain the p-value. Now how do we interpret p-value? Using the significance level. Now we have the data, we have the test, and we have the p-value output. Then we can select or reject the null hypothesis. So what significance level it chosen normally? So all these tests in my upcoming videos, I will explain you on what kind of data and in what kind of scenario these tests are used. Okay, before that, one thought here on what kind of significance level tells you what is the strength of your null hypothesis. Okay, or what is the, with what confidence you can reject or accept the null hypothesis. So in industry there is a common practice where if your p-value is less than 0.01, okay, if your p-value is less than 0.01, then you have a very strong case against null hypothesis. Very strong case. The meaning of this is only in 1% of the cases is your null hypothesis will hold true. In 99% of the cases your null hypothesis will be false. Okay, if your range is between 0.01 to p-value 0.01 to 0.05, then we say that it is a strong evidence against null hypothesis. Okay, if this range expands further, for example, if your p-value is in the range of 0.05 to 0.1, then you can say mild, right, mild evidence against null hypothesis. And if your p-value becomes more than 10% or more than 0.1, then you can say no evidence against null hypothesis and you accept the null hypothesis in this case. So what you would have seen in general, internet blogs everywhere, that this is the range that they take, 0.05 is the boundary that they set, and then they say that there is a strong evidence against the null hypothesis. This is how p-value and hypothesis testing work. I wrote some of the tests that are performed on the data to get p-value. In all the tools, R, Python, everywhere you will get the packages which will give you the p-value if you throw the data. But how do we interpret that and how do we choose the right data for right algorithms? That is what I will discuss in my next video. If you have any doubts on this topic, write me in comment. This topic was demanded by many of you, hence I created a video. Again, I will finish all those tests one by one and show you how to do that. So write me in comment if you have any doubts. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video. I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, stay safe and take care.